per year election. That's a long time ago.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Public Works Committee. I'm going to check and see which consent items we need to pull off for discussion, but then I'm going to move to another item first. What consent items would folks like to hear?
Motion to approve.
I'm going to ask actually for C3 and C4 presentations.
Move approve of balance.
If there's nothing, okay, is there a second? Those in favor of approving C1, C2, C5, and C6, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? That's approved. With the committee's indulgence, before moving to the consent items removed, Assistant City Manager Greg Turner has suggested, in view of the inclement weather on its way, that we get an update on the city's plans with regard to dealing with that. And if we could, with the committee's indulgence, we can move to that item. That will be particularly of interest, I think, to anyone who is watching this evening.
And Assistant Director of Transportation Ryan Newcomb will be doing the presentation for you.
Thank you. Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As you can expect, it's been a busy day at City Yard as we are trying desperately to get ready for what's headed our way tomorrow. So Greg asked me to put together some information that I'll share with you tonight. Basically kind of an overview of our typical policy, our standard operating procedures, and then some more specific information about what's happening over the next few days with this impending storm. So this first slide here just kind of gives you an overview of what the city has at its disposal. We see we have 2,000 tons of de-icing salt. I will let you know that we used about 1,300 tons 2 weeks ago during the event, and most of that was predicated on that first layer melted on us and then froze solid. So we had a layer of ice on a lot of streets underneath that 1.5 inches of snow. So it took a little bit of effort to get that melted away. But we did get a shipment in last week of another 1,300 tons to refill our bin, so it's basically at capacity now for this week's storm. When we go into snow mode, we operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as necessary. We run 2 12-hour shifts so that we're fully staffed. The equipment that's at our disposal, as you see there, we have 5 motor graders, which you typically see those in a roadway grading operation, but they're actually quite handy dealing with most snow events that we have here in Winston-Salem. We have 30 trucks equipped with push plows, 25 of which are our dump trucks that are also equipped with the salt spreaders. So we do have a few trucks that we do have just plows on, which are useful in some residential neighborhoods with narrower streets. And then recently, in the last few years, we've added the 3 brine storage tanks with the 3 pumps on trucks. We also have a smaller unit that we use on smaller residential streets, and all 4 of those trucks, as you probably know, have been out and about today. So some of our standard operating procedures, I know a popular topic today is the brine. I mentioned that we were out there today. This is a pre-treatment that's applied before a storm event, and the basic function of the brine is when snow or ice falls on a roadway, it literally forms a bond with the asphalt. So the 2 materials practically become one. And that makes it difficult on the back end to then melt and remove that material. So where the brine is shown to be helpful is when applied before a storm, it can either delay or in some cases hold off that bond so that even if we were to get a foot of snow on top of a brine, that hopefully when we got down to that bottom layer, we could push it away and it would be more slushy than it would be bound to the road. So the way we do our program here in Winston-Salem is we start with local residential streets and try to cover all the residential streets, and if we cover those, we move up to collectors and then up to major streets. All of that predicated on the conditions and how long we have when we know a storm is coming before it actually occurs. And the last bullet there is that the brine should not be applied if precipitation is going to start as rain. The obvious reason is that it would wash it away. And so we would spend some resources to get the material out on the street, but if it starts as rain instead of snow or ice, then it's just going to wash away that material and not do us any good. The next point down is that you'll often wonder, well, why have we not put out any salt yet? We try to wait until there's a little bit of moisture on the roadway. And the reason for that is because if we don't, the salt will tend to blow away as traffic goes over it. A lot of times, our winter storms here in Winston come with a lot of wind. This one's going to come with a lot of wind tomorrow. So we want a little bit of moisture there so that salt will stay in place. And then as traffic goes over it, it packs it down and it gets on that material and melts it right away. We tend to plow roads with an inch of snow or more. And our general practice is to put the plows on the trucks when the forecast is for 2 inches or more. Now, 2 weeks ago, they weren't calling for more than 2 inches, but we were able to see that we were going to be able to push some material. So we went ahead and put the plows on the trucks. So it's not a hard rule, but it is something that we tend to look for 2 inches or more in the forecast before we start putting the plows on. When it comes to an actual snow removal situation, I mentioned to you that when we do the brine, we start on residential streets and then work our way up. And the reason for that is because the snow removal works in the opposite fashion. We start with major streets, and once we get those clear to the pavement, then we drop to collectors, same process, get them clear to the pavement, and then move to the residential streets. This is probably the number one question we get asked as a department, and council members probably get asked this question as well, about residential streets. And the reason being, I'll just give you an example. My wife and I rent a house in Ardmore off of Academy Street, off of Brent Street, exactly. So if city crews started plowing residential streets, if they plowed Brent Street first, that'd be great. I would get out of my driveway, I would drive up Brent Street, and I would get to Academy, and I would not be able to go anywhere because Academy is one of our major routes. So that's why we start with major and then work our way down, so that when folks get out of their neighborhoods, they actually have a place to go, a way to get out. We divide the city up into 5 areas, and then we have 6 dump trucks with spreaders and plows and a motor grader assigned to each of those areas. So we run 5 crews in each 12-hour shift to make sure we have each area of the city covered. And I wanted to show you this next. This is a typical example of a snow route map that our crews use. This one in particular is just Route 11, but I wanted to show you this because you see the red roadways are marked out as major streets, and then the blue dash lines mark out the collectors, and the rest of the streets within the route are the local streets. So if you were a crew coordinator over this route, you would work with your crews on a snow removal to clear the red streets first. Then you would drop down to those collectors. In this case, this route only has those 2 collector streets, or those 2 areas with collector streets. Once those were cleared, they would drop down and begin on the residential streets. So now what everybody wants to know is what's going to happen here. I tell the news people ask me that all the time, and I tell them if I knew exactly what it was going to do, I'd be a millionaire, because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So we decided not to brine our streets yesterday. That was a question that we asked as a staff, and we huddled together. You know, what happened yesterday afternoon was it looked like it was snowing, but as soon as it hit the ground, it was melting. And, you know, actually my house water was running in the gutter as if I was getting a rain shower. So our concern with brining was that we would have been wasting our resources. I know the state and some other cities in the area decided to move forward with their operations, but we just didn't feel like we'd get any benefit out of it if we did it yesterday. The forecast originally showed some of the snow beginning to earlier, this evening, but now that start of the snow has been pushed to either, I'd say probably 9 to 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, and it's going to continue most likely all the way through Thursday morning. The latest advisory we just received from AccuWeather indicated a period of extremely heavy snow tomorrow afternoon. So my guess is once it begins to snow, we will likely see conditions on the roadways deteriorate pretty quickly. So the other thing I've been telling all the news people today when they've given me the opportunity is I've encouraged people, if you don't have to be out and about tomorrow, then please stay home because it could get dangerous really quick. The other thing that has us concerned is the potential for periods of sleet and freezing rain in addition to the snow. If we end up with just a snow event, it's much easier to push it out of the way, but if it gets layers of ice mixed in there, it could complicate things and could make the conditions on the roads that much more dangerous. And the forecasts since this weekend have been all over the map, but now we seem to be settling in, I put 10 to 12 on the slide, we seem to be settling into an 8 to 12-inch forecast, with the potential, obviously, for some pockets to get even more than that. But I would say we're probably in a safe bet to get 8 to 12 here in Winston-Salem pretty easily. And the amount of snow we get is going to depend on how much sleet and freezing rain we may end up with on Wednesday evening. So, as everyone at the yard has said today, that's the big one. This winter we've had a lot of close calls and near misses, but this one doesn't look like it's going to be that. So the preparations that we have made so far, we have all our spreaders and plows are on the trucks. I mentioned the number earlier. We have actually 26 trucks with plows and spreaders loaded up this time, and then the 6 trucks with just plows. We have called in personnel from other departments to make sure we are fully staffed, and I'm happy to say that I would like to give a big thank you to the other departments who have volunteered their personnel, because we are fully staffed both day and night shifts on each crew. So we have all the equipment operators we need and all the truck drivers we need as well. My anticipation is that we will likely load our salt probably early tomorrow morning. I'm going to meet with our staff at the shift change in a little bit here to go over what our plan is. But because of the timing, we change shift at 10 a.m., so we're probably going to load before the shift change so that when the shift change happens, we are ready to hit the streets and go. I mentioned already that the brine operation started this morning. We plan to continue that through the night and into tomorrow morning until the snow begins to fall, just so we can try to cover as many streets as possible. I mentioned that you don't want to, we'll stop that once the snow begins, so we'll try to cover as many of those streets as we can. Inevitably, though, I can tell you that it will be unlikely we'll get through all of the residential streets. If you look at that example of a map, you see how the neighborhoods get broken up. It's not like we can drive from one residential street to another. We often have to go back out of a neighborhood and back into another one. And so it makes it cumbersome to try to get through them, but we'll get through as many as we can, certainly. And our next steps, as I mentioned, once the snow begins, our crews will begin to plow and salt our major streets. Depending on how heavy it comes down, sometimes it gets to the point where it's difficult to stay out in front of how quickly it's falling, but we'll do our best. And then once we get the major streets clear, we will drop down to the collectors. At this point, because the timetable keeps shifting, I'd put on here that we anticipate continuing the operation through at least Friday. I would say that that's probably a safe bet now that the timeline for the storm has been pushed back. The good news is that Friday's forecast currently is for highs in the upper 40s with a chance of rain showers, which would, if that were to come to fruition, Mother Nature would help us out tremendously. So I suspect the pushing operation will continue at least through Friday and possibly into Saturday as we try to get all of our streets cleared. So that's all I had. I guess I can take any questions that you might have.
Questions? Good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. It is what it is.
So take home the slideshow information and have it by your phone for the next week. Okay. Item C3, please.
Information on sidewalk connectivity needs, mapping, and system gap identification.
All right, thank you. I had asked that this be prepared, and what you have in the packet, and Mr. Turner can answer questions about this, are a combination of the sidewalk sections in red on these quadrant maps that are planned, and at least some of the others that have been requested, although not all the others that have been requested. I can give examples of additional ones that I know have been requested that are not indicated. One of the things that I was going to ask about for a future report that's related to this is a look at those identified major barriers to connections. And an example in my area would be the bridges that Jonestown Road uses to cross 421 and 40. In both cases, they're pedestrian and bicycle safety passage hazards and have been brought to my attention by people who would like to be able to access the shopping areas between those two bridges from neighborhoods on either side. I know that in at least one case there's going to be real difficulty in making that work because the bridge is narrow compared to its existing traffic load. But in the other case, there might be something we can do. And there are going to be, I think, similar examples peppered around the city that your constituents have identified to you that I'd like to encourage you to bring in and get those examples to Mr. Turner so that our staff can look into how those strategic travel barriers can be addressed to improve pedestrian bicycle access all around the community. Any thoughts or comments on that, Mr. Turner?
Following up on that, Mr. Chairman, there are types of things that we would be looking at would include limited right-of-way, which staff will identify. The lack of curb and gutter, which although we've said it's not a prerequisite for sidewalk, in many cases having curb and gutter in makes sidewalk installation easier for both the city and the residents to work around. Utilities that are in conflict with the location of the sidewalk, parking lots or other commercial activity adjacent to the area where the sidewalk is going to propose to go in. And then a big one that we encounter are landscaping and other features that residents have put in the right-of-way that have to be relocated in order to install sidewalks. So council members, as you're looking at areas, if you have some that have those kind of features, just let us know. We'll see what can be done about them.
Yeah. And in this kind of example, I'm thinking in terms of problem situations that are perhaps more extensive than the typical, we just don't have a sidewalk there. But real strategic barriers to travel between a neighborhood and a nearby park, or between a neighborhood and a nearby shopping area. I know that in the case of general agenda item number 3, we're going to look at an area around Wake Forest, and that study and those recommendations include, I think, at least one example of what I'm thinking of as strategic barrier. I think Polo Road in that case. So I know that there are going to be examples of this all around the city, and I would. It's one of my goals for the next 3 years to be more aggressive about looking for things we can do to address those. I know we got a long agenda, so are there any other comments or inquiries? Yes, Mr. Clark.
Comment and a question. If anyone doubts how little sidewalks we have, look at these maps. Mrs. Burke isn't here, but I looked in the northeast ward, and with the exception of just right towards downtown, it's virtually no sidewalks, and that's true of about all of us. But my question is, Mr. Turner, we do have a list of sidewalks we put in, and I know it's a multi-year plan.
Correct.
What year are we in?
2.
Out of?
Well, it goes until we finish, so it's not dedicated to a certain number of years. We go until we finish, and then when we finish or get close to finish, we'll bring you a new list.
Okay, when would you
I would
anticipate?
say that the list will take about 5 years to go through.
Okay, so we got a ways to go before we can put more on the list. Okay?
Mr. Montgomery.
How do we account for sidewalks placed in neighborhood plan developments, like new developments where there are certain requirements for those? How do we account for that within our system? When we take over those streets, is that then integrated in our numbers?
Yes, it becomes part of our system.
Okay.
Others? All right, thank you very much. C4, please.
Report on Winston-Salem Transit Authority Next Bus Technology Passenger Information System.
And the reason I pulled this off consent agenda is because you can see that we do have a slideshow there, and this is something I think is of real significance to our transit system, make it more user-friendly and increase our potential market to more discretionary riders too. There is a generation now that relies on carrying these around and using them for everything. If they can use these to access when they can actually catch a bus at that next stop near them, then they're actually potential customers, potential riders. Mr. Barnes.
About a little over a year ago, the Winston-Salem Transit Authority was awarded a grant by the North Carolina Department of Transportation for a real-time passenger information system. It has a number of features that Tina Carson-Wilkins, our marketing director, will go over with you. And we have embedded it on a website that we're going to roll out next week along with the Next Bus passenger system. So, Tina.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
About 23 years ago, when I started with the Transit Authority, our passenger information system consisted of
Mike.
an employee.
Mike.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Our
we're-
passenger information system consisted of an employee sitting at the window, answering questions, or people calling in, asking questions by phone. About 9 years ago, we started an interactive voice response system that allowed passengers to call in to make reservations for TransAid or get bus information, but it's automated. And so once they call in and they're driven to speak with one of our specialists, they would then be pushed into our automated system and they would get static information. So the Next Bus technology is fantastic. It's going to be a great benefit for our passengers. And it's going to be wonderful for them for several reasons. Number one, it's going to reduce their, expected wait time. They don't have to get out on a bus stop and just wait and anticipate a bus and wait and anticipate a bus. It's also going to take away the uncertainty of them having a bus come by their stop, particularly in times like inclement weather, because we may have to switch to snow routes, or we may even have to delay service for some reason or another, but I'm sure Mr. Barnes won't have that. But it's also, going to increase their safety. It's going to empower them to be able to have the bus information at the palm of their hands. Now, there's going to be 4 ways that they'll be able to access the information. Number one, if they don't have a cell phone, they can call from a landline and just simply dial 778-3876. All they have to have is a stop number, a route number, and there's automated information that they will be able to get from Next Bus specifically. If they have a cell phone and they'd like to have the information texted to them, then they can just sign up for text messages at 41411, have a stop number, and they'll be able to have the information sent to their telephone every single day. If they're sitting at a desk, working, or wherever, if they're at home and they want to get out to the bus stop 5 minutes before the bus is expected, they will have the ability to do that. Additionally, if they have a mobile device, the information that they pull up from that mobile device, initially when they pull it up, it's going to ask their location. If they allow their locator to be on, then any bus that's near the routes that they're going to be traveling on near the bus stop that they are going to be standing at, all of those routes will pull up. So it's going to give them several different options. The one that we really hope that they will utilize a lot is the internet, because we are rolling out not only Next Bus, but we're also going to be rolling out our new website. Our web designer, Mr. Mike Clinton, is going to assist me with this, but the beauty of going to our website is they can do everything from the home page. This is live information that you'll be able to see if they were able to, I'll say, pull up, let's say 444. That's a night route. So what we're going to do is pull up a route that is probably definitely running at this time. Usually about 6:30, all of our routes are coming in to go out for the last time. So we want to make sure we provide information on a route that is traveling. So what they'll get is the route number, the direction that it's traveling, which will be leaving town, the stop that they're going to be going to, and the amount of time that it's going to take for that bus to get to where they are. With this information, they'll be able to wait as they get out to the bus stop if they happen to be on the stop at Thurman and Gillette Street. But if you'll click right there where all of the stops are, they'll be able to know all of the stops. They'll be able to see all of the stops along the route. So any place along that route that they may live, they'll be able to go to any of those stops and get that specific information. If we'll roll down the page just a little bit, we want to provide them with the opportunity to also see live maps. These live maps will enable them to see the bus as it's traveling through the community. The beauty of this is, again, all they have to do is wait just a few minutes before the bus will be coming in their community. This information is updated every 20 seconds. So once they pull it up on the internet, if they go to our website or even to the Next Bus website, they'll be able to see the bus as it's traveling without any problems, no hesitations. They'll know exactly where the bus is. Right now, this bus is traveling along, what is that street? North Trade Street. It's at the transportation center, waiting for people to board to go out. People will be able to pull this information up anywhere. If it's Wi-Fi connected, they can pull it up from their location. We also have Google Maps available for passengers to be able to see. So they will be able to just simply go online, pull it up, and see exactly where their bus is traveling at any time. Finally, on our page, we're also giving them an opportunity to learn how to get text messages. Not only does this system allow them to get text messages, it will also send emails directly to their computers. So I'm receiving messages now because I'm trying out the system as a passenger. So I get emails every day. Every morning it says, Tina, it's time to go to the bus stop. And in the afternoon it says, Tina, it's time to go to the bus stop, so that I'll know to go home. This is the beauty of Next Bus. And so we're hoping that our passengers will be able to take advantage of it. We'll use it. We're going to roll it out. We'll provide an information process and education process for them, and give them a chance to try something very new and that's very beneficial for them.
Thank you. Mr. Montgomery had a question.
I do. Actually, on this same page here, with the 9 minutes and the 84 minutes, is that 9 minutes, is that what's coming? And then if you have to wait to the next, is that
The next time it'll be coming by in 84 minutes. Absolutely.
Is there any way to say that there instead of, or does it say that? I may not be able to see it, but is there anything that says that from there? That what the 8 minutes is and what the 84 minutes is?
Well, track vehicles, well, I think we can, I guess, Mr. Clinton can try to make it more specific for our passengers.
You get what I'm saying in terms of if you
I
read it?
absolutely do, yes, so that people will understand.
That's coming from the Next Bus website, so that'd be difficult to change. So the process of educating people with respect to the website is very important. So that's why we're taking them through that process.
Okay, gotcha. Because if you didn't know, I figured it out, but
Yeah.
somebody else may not. But I guess the education process. Other question, well, not question, but comment. I think it's a great system. I think, again, we just had a conversation in the previous committee about technology and how technology is advancing and how we need to take advantage of that. And I think this is going to help our bus system be more efficient, and again, help some of those individual discretionary riders, know where the bus is and where they can catch it. And I don't see any of the city IT folk, but I don't know if we can include this in our digital cities application next year, but this will be something good to include that we're doing as a city.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Councilman Bessie. I'll be really brief. I think this is a wonderful idea, and I'm glad to see this being rolled out. I think it'll be beneficial for all of our citizens who ride the bus, whether you're discretionary riders or any other type of riders. Just one question. You may have mentioned this. The information, you talked about the educational piece. The information on how to access all the information that we see here, will we have those posted on the actual bus routes?
We're going to post them on the bus routes. We're going to have electronic signage at about 7 different locations so that passengers who are either at either of the hospitals, at Haynes Mall, or any of the Walmart locations will be able to see the information on electronic signs. But we're also moving to have some bus stop signs created that will not only have a QR code on it, it's going to have a stop number on it, route information, so that passengers will know exactly which buses travel past that bus stop.
Very good.
I don't have anything else to say. I mean, this is wonderful.
Ms. Adams.
Thank you. I think what's going to be key is the education part. If we got to make sure we get that piece right, because it's great. I love it. But if we don't educate the public as to how to use this, as you said in the presentation, everybody doesn't have Wi-Fi. everybody's phone doesn't access some of the stuff that some of these phones do, and people need to understand it instead of thinking that I got a sale so I can get this. We're going to have to do a real good job, so I would be interested coming forward, Mr. Barnes and staff, how are we going to reach our masses as to how they're going to know this, they're going to get it, and possibly review later, follow up, is it working? And comments from the customers themselves.
Yeah.
Good job.
Tell us, please, what you have planned for rollout.
Okay, well, actually, we started some radio commercials as teasers a couple of weeks ago, but we're going to do some radio commercials, television, but we are going to work directly with our passengers. Someone once told me that you almost have to have a master's degree to read our schedules, but our bus passengers really do get it. So we're going to, for several weeks, we're going to set up in our transportation center, and we are going to literally work with them, show them how to use it. We're going to have information on all of our buses. We're even going to put information on the outside of our buses, so passengers will know that Next Bus is here. This is new technology for them, and we want them to be comfortable in using it. So we're going to be going to some of the travel groups that are in town, some groups that utilize TransAid, but also use our fixed route service. So we're going to do a lot of grassroots, I guess, marketing, for lack of a better term, to try to make sure everyone understands what we're going to be doing.
Do you have a general media event planned yet?
I beg your pardon?
Do you have a general media announcement event planned
Yes,
yet?
we do. We do have a press release, and the voice of the Transit Authority usually would be me, but the face is Mr. Barnes. So we're going to really put him to work a lot.
Do you have are you having a press event? Are you having a time where you bring reporters in and tour them through?
That's fantastic. We would love to do that, and we will put that on our agenda.
I think you have some council members who would be interested in helping with that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Please let us know what you may want to set up and what times, and see if we can get some presents for you.
Wonderful.
It's okay. We'll have our marketing communications department work with council members and with transit to come up with something.
That'd be great, because this is a big deal, I think. And we'd like to help get the word out to the community.
Thank you. We're
Thank you.
really excited about it.
Mr. Taylor.
One last thing, in order to access the information, you did mention there will be a number posted and given out for citizens to call.
Yes.
One of the things I would suggest, if it's not too far gone, I know whenever we access CityLink, for example, you can call 311. Maybe you can use CityLink or some other service that's 211, or something that's easy to remember when you're at home. I know some of I'm not going to call a particular genre of citizens, but some people forget things, and I'm one of them.
Excuse me.
Be careful.
I forget things all the time, and it would be easier for me to remember 211, 811, or something like that. But maybe it's just a suggestion.
We're really going to push. We're getting some items in, and we're going to have 41411 on all of the information, so that they would at least know how to get text messages. And the new phone number, we'll be rolling that out for everyone to be able to use, but we'll certainly try to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Montgomery.
My last comment is on the website itself. When will that actually roll out? When will that be?
It's going live next Tuesday morning.
Okay, and I like the fact of what you said in the beginning, that you're able to access everything from the first page.
Yes.
That makes it easy for all genres of
Thank you.
of people in our community, because sometimes when you start going through pages, you can get lost in where you are. So I think that's great.
Thank you.
Particularly old folks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we'll look forward to working with you on the community education on this. That takes care of our consent agenda items. Thank you for your patience. Let's go to the general agenda and item G1, please.
Presentation on Winston-Salem Transit Authority Comprehensive Operation Analysis.
Thank you very much. And let's see, who will we be having make this presentation?
Tanique will be introducing, the Director of Transportation will be introducing her staff who will be doing the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McCullough.
Good evening.
Thank you for having us. Carrie Fujisawa is our transit planner, and Carrie Fujisawa is our transit planner, and Carrie will actually do the presentation on our new transit system, our comprehensive operational analysis. In the past, you all have asked us to look at our transit system to see how we can make it more efficient for our current users, but more attractive for new users also. And our staff, along with WISTA and our transportation staff, have worked together working on this study. So Carrie will now speak and present this information to you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'll talk about the objective of this new route system, and then go over briefly current system, and then data I've used and methodology, and then finally the new route system. So objective is to create the new bus system to better serve riders, so riders can get to their destination quicker, and then they will have better access to the bus, and then hopefully we can provide more frequent service. That was our main objectives, but we also have a constraint, which is have to limit to the cost. So total miles, but all the bus travels have to be the same or less than what we are running right now. And so does the total service time. So that was object constraint limitation we have to remember. And then, as you know, our current system is hub and spoke. So every route connect to the transportation center. So anyone who is traveling to not going to the downtown area, they have to come to a transportation center, which might be lots of wasting the time for riders. And so I looked at the other system to improve what better network would be. And alternative would be, this is the low and moderate density city, but still, if you look at the whole city, not every area is the same traveling pattern. So some area has more transit demand compared to other areas. So we came up with some kind of combination of the grid system, which is great for high demand, big city, but we are not there yet. So it's going to be a combination of grid system and the feeder system. So, but to come up with a new design, I had to have some concrete data, some specific data. So those are the data we collected or already existed. So I will go over quickly, but the first one is top 20 major stops from WISTA data. So the WISTA bus has a sensor system, so it counts every time rider gets on or off. So from that data, we can see which stops are most utilized. And then second data was from the business organizations, where the employees are greater than 50 or more people. And then we also use the subsidized housing locations and the apartment complex and colleges, hospitals, shopping centers, and then senior centers. So these are already available, but the last data was origin destination study. That wasn't there, so we decided to actually collect last summer. And so So the first high demand bus stops, that's from with the automatic count data. As I just briefly said, that's the automatic count data. So you will be able to see which stops are indicating high demands, but that doesn't actually say where people start the trip and end the trip. There's a missing data between bus stop and their starting point, and also the bus stop and their final destination. So high demand bus stop data from Worcester count data, that is something missing. And this is the map of the current routes and 20 high demand stops, and mostly main places like Walmart or downtown or hospitals, college. Those are showing out as high demand stops. And then this is a major employee location, but this doesn't really equate to the high demand transit riders. It's just showing that these are locations that 50 or more people are employed. And these green circles are showing the subsidized housing. And these are apartments. And this slide shows college and hospitals and shopping centers. And this is senior centers. So these are wonderful data we had, but as I said, the actual origin and destination are unknown. So we collected the data, and the detailed result is on our website. But if you recall at the TSE meeting, the major finding of this audit study was majority of riders, they do take a bus to get to work. So bus system is a very important part of their lives, and also our city as a whole as well. And so after we collected the origin destination data, we had about more than 1,200 samples, which are about over 10% of our riders. And so this magenta dot shows the origin of rider, and then dark blue dots shows his or her destination, and then it's just linking between two. So creating OD lines, as you can see, the straight line would be the ideal trip for each rider, but analyzing every sample would be really, it's not easy to and time consuming. So we usually group together these riders by the area called traffic analysis zone, TAZ. And these TAZ are coming already set by the Census Bureau. So we assume people in one particular TAZ have similar traveling patterns. So all these data, the methodology was draw the lines between TAZs. So same people, not say people, but rider in the same TAZ, and then destination of same TAZ, they are grouped together. So then that way you can identify which way is the showing high demand trips. And then also we incorporated all other data, like I said, major trip generators like hospitals and schools and count data. So this slide shows thicker line, meaning that's a higher demand, and then thinner line means that's a lower demand by each TAZ. So that's how, so we came up with this demand lines, and then we rank them from higher, then start drawing the new routes. And this is what we have as a new routes. And there are 25 routes, new routes, and 3 of them among 25 circulators. And one is around Haines Mall, and one is around the Forsyth County Health Center, and then third one is around the Haines Mill, Walmart, and Bethabra. That's 3 circulators. And then this slide shows comparison between current and new routes. Some overlaps on the same roadway, and then some completely different. And gray one is the current routes, and green shows the new routes. So the most significant difference, I would say, we created more transfer points rather than just going to the transportation center. So mostly, major one is the Forsyth County Health Center, because there was lots of demand in that area. And then the other one is gonna be Sturmer Park Circle. That's north of the Target on University Parkway. Then other there are some other major transfer points, but I would say besides transportation center and Haines Mall, so these 2, Sturmer Park Circle and the Forsyth County Health Center, these are 2 major transfer points. So there are multiple buses will be coming at these locations. People can transfer instead of going to transportation center. So that's what we have. And next steps will be I start working on the bus stops. So I'll be locating some bus stops on the paper, and then also come up with some new bus schedule. And then probably I'll wait for all of your inputs, and then tweak some. I expect some changes coming from all of you. And then after that's done, we'll hold the public meetings. And then we might, not we might, but we would have some new design for the bus stops, including the route number and some schedule, not just bus stop sign, but make it more clear to riders at each bus stop. And also, like a next bus, we need to educate riders if we are going to implement this. So it's going to be lots of training and educational and marketing sessions. So I didn't go over each route, but each route is in your packet. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful work.
a lot of material here. I'm sure we'll want to hold this in committee for further discussion. Probably the question for the committee and for staff is whether it would make more sense for us to do that, to continue the discussion next month or in April. I know this is going to be
April.
April.
Yes. Based upon your agenda for March.
Okay. So let's plan on that, but let's see what questions we have today to get out. Thank you, Ms. Fujisari, and Mr. Clark.
Just a couple questions and comments. First off, on the maps that you have in here, it would be helpful if we could get a high-resolution map. Some of them you can't read the streets and whatever, so if we could actually get the actual maps.
Oh, yes.
And I'm, at least the ones that I want to look at, you can't tell the streets. Number two, just a comment or question. The transfer points become more critical. Now everyone transfers at the transit center where there are bathrooms and places that are heated and cooled, et cetera. Now we got people transferring at points out in the communities. So I think we're going to, I would like a little more information on, are we going to put up shelters or whatever they may be now? Hanks Mall maybe is not quite as difficult because you do have entrances to the mall where that are sheltered and this, that, and the other. Implementation, I see this as a massive implementation issue. We just learned, the folks just presented this wonderful online system that, but when this is implemented, every point on his thing's got to be changed. So I think we need a more information on the implementation. You may have to replace every bus stop, and I don't see how you can face this. So one day you ride the old system, and maybe that's on a Friday, and then Monday morning everybody's got to be ready to ride the new system. And I see a lot of phone calls to angry council members. So I think implementation is critical. Now, having said all that, I do appreciate this study. I think demographics change where people work and live change, and I do think you do need to update your transit systems accordingly. So I think it's a good idea to do it. It's just, to me, it's just going to be a massive implementation, and I look forward to seeing the details of that implementation. Thank you.
Mr. Montgomery.
One thing in terms of looking at some of the new routes compared to the old routes, which I think in looking at pictures, one is the new picture is much clearer in terms of where the routes are and where they're going. But one thing in looking at it there, people will have to be much more intentional about which route and which stop they go to catch the bus than they would have been before. Because before, they know they're going to end up downtown at the transit center, and so therefore they can get on and transfer at any point. With this, again, they will have to be intentional on which route they choose to get on to connect with another specific bus to get to their individual destination, which again goes to the point that Councilman Clark said in terms of, making sure that we do a good job. And actually, I think the next bus will be even more essential piece to be included in that process once this rolls out. So I think those will work well together in that process. But is there anything, and I may not have seen it, that talks about the time spent on the bus getting to a particular stop compared to numbers before on the old routes? Is there anything that can sense any of that?
Each route, we actually drove a new route and then timed it. So each route should be able to complete one trip within 30 minutes. So it's pretty, in terms of the travel time, it should be similar. And then probably we will run each hour, except maybe couple routes are very short, so those routes can be run maybe twice or every 30 minutes or every 20 minutes. But every other route probably every hour. So, I forgot to mention some routes not going to transportation center at all, like it's in a packet. It stops at the I believe it's four routes going to Forsyth County Medical Center. That area, and then stop there, so it's not going to transportation center. But there are also the routes going by the area, so if people need to go to transportation center, they can also get there. But
hang on just one moment, Ms. Fujisari. Mr. Turner has some additional information on the timing question.
What I was going to say is we'd be happy to bring something back in April on any information we can develop on average travel time for the riders before and after. I think that was what Councilmember Montgomery was after.
Yeah, and it goes into my last question, and I'll be done, in terms of just that opportunity to pick up those discretionary riders in that process of, even if it means for us, as we look at these new routes, are there some routes as planned that may be on an hour circulation of some sort that, if put into a more consistent time in terms of where it was a 30-minute rotation, does that look at any additional opportunities for that? And I think that was some of the things that were looked at in here as well. And if so, what type of dollar amount additional would be required to support that type of addition in that process?
So frequency is known, nationwide to be a major factor in the attractiveness of a system to discretionary riders. It's a key point that in preparation of this operational analysis, a major assumption was made that it would be resource static. That there would be the redesign being proposed is based on the assumption that we will not be putting additional resources into the program. If we change that assumption, then additional opportunities are opened up. So one of the things, what I hear Councilmember Montgomery posing is a question along the lines of where could we really pick up service level if we were willing and able to put additional resources into, say, increased frequency of service. Councilor Adams and McIntosh.
I thank staff. I think we've probably been talking about this, I know, for at least the past 3 to 4 years. And we thank you. You heard us. That because the city, as Councilmember Clark says, the demographics, everything changes, you have to update systems like this on a routine basis. I was wondering, again, and maybe they said it, I just wasn't paying attention, when is the date of implementation, the possible date of implementation, and is it possible, as Councilmember Clark said, can we do both of them simultaneously together? I know that's a big task, but you can't do one without the other. I mean, you're just going to end up creating this ball of confusion. You got my routes over here, you've changed the routes. They both got to be meshed at the same time. I would think that we might need to look at, we might not be able to roll it out as quick as we want, but I think we need to do this right if we're going to do it. If it means a few months, Mr. Turner, to get it right, or a year, whatever. But it's got to be right, because we know how customers are. And we know how we citizens of Winston-Salem, if you don't get it right the first time, we don't give you a second time. It just doesn't work. I was also looking at, again, the implementation. Again, key is education, training, strategy. I think it might be a good idea that we work with the agencies that are the recipients of the customers that we're, helping to provide them with. If these are customers that are going to the downtown health center, these are customers that are going to the hospitals, if these are customers that are going somewhere you got to tie these people in to help with this education, where we put a board up or a LED screen that helps all of these customers understand what we're getting ready to do. Because if I'm used to catching the bus for 5 or 6 years, taking me to the downtown health center, you tell me you're changing it, okay, but I didn't get a paper, I don't have cable, I don't have TV, you know, I don't see the newspaper, I might not even have a phone that allows me to see this message. Now we got to at least try to incorporate partnership with the agencies to help us, because we're helping to provide a means for their customers to get to them. So they got to help us too. So I think we need to pull them into the table to help make that happen, so they understand. If we don't pull but 4 or 5, Wake Med, Novant, whoever, Haynes Mall, Health Center, we got to do that because I think that's important. But all in all, I think this is great. Again, to Councilman Montgomery's point, I'm glad that we're moving forward digitally, technology, and listening to the customers, the citizens of Winston. Great job.
Mr. Turner, did you have any, or Ms. Villa, any information about conceptually the implementation time frame before we move on to Mr. McIntosh?
I can speak to that if you'd like.
Please.
The implementation will take some time. We anticipate that it would take at least 9 months or more to get the routes established. Well, once the routes are accepted, then determining where the stops would be, relocating signs, putting in the new information into the next bus system, getting the having public hearings, I think, was another one of the next steps that that's necessary. So having all of that, going through all of those next steps will take some time, and so at least 9 months, if not more. The other thing to consider is the next bus system is something to help the current riders become familiar with the current routes. And I think because it's a new system and trying to push that out now, as these current riders become familiar with the system, then at some point later we come with the new routes. They're already used to using that system and familiar with it. And then it's not changing everything at once and becoming overload. So maybe transitioning with the next bus system now and allowing them that opportunity because they're already familiar with the routes that they're using. And then as we continue to work on adjusting these routes and making sure that they work for the community and then push out the new routes, then the next bus system will actually be another tool that will help them become more familiar with where that bus actually is for those users that have access directly to the system.
Yeah, a constellation of communication tools that are in place then to assist in making the transition to a more efficient route design work. Yes. Mr. McIntosh.
My question is how this relates to the closing of Business 40 and whether or not these routes will work when we have that major shutdown, or whether we're going to have to retool the whole route system prior to and then after it's back online.
I think that the Business 40 project will be a separate study in itself as far as the routes that we would need to, how we would need to rework our routes, whether they're these new routes or existing routes that are still in place at that time. But I think that's a separate study that needs to occur and that we need to be working on with NCDOT because the closing of Business 40 is a totally different issue. It's not just a matter of trying to get people are figuring out where their destination or origin and destination is, but then it's now a matter of, now that you've got the road closure and heavy traffic being detoured to other locations, then how do you use those, use those parameters, work around those parameters? And there's a bus system then become another form of transportation to help people get from one point to another during that 2-year period. So I think if that answers the question.
That's what I was looking for. I mean, this is, to a degree, the bus system becomes an asset during that closure period that we can, hopefully use.
And hopefully after the 2-year period, then you'll have more users, and we'll see that our system has actually grown.
Thank you. Mr. Montgomery.
It was just one added thing. I know we talked around the table in terms about we're just going to come back, but in terms of implementation and marketing, I think for the majority, and I'm sure that those who work every day there down at the transit center know that they have a captive audience of riders who they have the opportunity, who are consistent, to start that process of letting them know what's happening, what's going on. I think the hardest part is going to be for those individuals who are not normal riders to start to learn the process. For those who are riders, I think it may be an easier process because they're there if we start at an early enough time to start that process. So I think folk down there probably have a good idea of how that process should work and go forward because they're there every day with those who ride the bus on a consistent basis. So.
And one of the things I'm going to be interested in looking at as we tweak or make adjustments to what's been proposed and prepare for a round of public hearings, that you consider the question of how are we addressing situations where, say, parts of neighborhoods are on routes now, they're not on proposed new routes. Major apartment complex that, just at a glance I saw in the area I represent, a major apartment complex that's on a route now and isn't on a new route. And there are, regular riders there. So that's either going to create a hardship for some of your regular riders and certainly part of your identified potential expansion base, or an adjustment needs to be made to keep them on the route. So, what options would we have? And I'm sure we'll find little and sometimes not so little examples of that around the city as we look at the impacts.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments, Mr. Clark?
I would suggest at the appropriate time that the council person involved with that specific route meet with the transportation folks one-on-one and say, okay, if you went over a block over, you might capture this or that to kind of fine-tune it.
Right. And in fact, one of the sort of traditional things that we do in Winston-Salem is that while we're all responsible for everybody in the city and levels of service, we each have additional special obligations to the folks in the territory that we represent. So I would encourage all of us to take a look at the overall system, but also to take a special hard look at the routes that serve the wards we're from, and bring forward any specific and identified complications that we see there.
And you would certainly be the expert for your ward and everyone else accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. Other comments or questions at this point? We'll look forward to hearing more in April. Thank you. Excellent starting point. Good basic work. Ms. Fujisawa, thank you for your presentation. Ms. McCullough, Mr. Barnes, we'll look forward to continuing to work with you on this. And we'll look forward to helping roll out the next bus system, too. So thank you. General G2, please.
Resolution approving a locally preferred alternative for an urban circulator serving portions of the center city.
And we have a presentation here on the alternatives analysis. I know that some of us have been involved in that process, and for some others, it's while not completely new. This is an in-depth look beyond what you've seen so far. Mr. Norby is going to be presenting the information today. We do have a consultant who, at whatever point we're ready to send this forward to council, whether it's next week or a month from now, the consultant will be planning to come up and help make the presentation to full council. So, Mr. Norby, if you'll go over the analysis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, council members. And yes, the consultants were planning on being here today, but there are a lot of plane cancellations going through Atlanta, so they had to kind of ditch that plan about mid-morning. So I am the pinch hitter. So keep that in mind as I'm going through this. The idea of an urban circulator has been around for a number of years, and the idea is to focus on the downtown and the center city area around it as we continue to grow economically and population-wise, to connect all the different destinations that are in there and enhance economic growth. So that's been the whole idea all along. We had a streetcar feasibility study in 2006. And the next step after that was to do an alternatives analysis, which in the federal lingo, if we're looking to get federal funding, is a necessary next step to show them that we've looked at all of the alternatives, including streetcar, but others, and have come to the conclusion of here is the technology that we think is best from a local perspective, and here is the route that we think is best from a local perspective. And then that leads its way into next steps whenever they come, or however fast or slow that they come. This alternatives analysis was funded by funds that came through the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Transportation, as well as assistance from PART and NCDOT. And Scott Ryan, Executive Director of PART, is here. And PART has been a big supporter of this as a possible building block in a larger regional system for the future there. So, so they have a big interest in this as well. This has been a 2-year process. It began in basically the first public workshop was in March of 2012, and that has progressed through these last almost 2 years with a lot of public input, with technical and policy advisory committee, with many meetings with different stakeholders, and certainly input and updates with you as council members, as well as the Public Works Committee. And as you mentioned, the work has been done by HDR Engineering, which is our consultants for that. They have a lot of expertise all over the country with urban circulator systems, and they've brought in their expertise from a number of different offices around the country. Tanique McCullough is here too, and she partnered along with me in terms of working with the consultants as they did their work. I'm going to cover quickly as I can, the process, the goals, certainly the study area, the options for both technology and route, summarize the public outreach, discuss why the locally preferred alternative that is selected in here was proposed, conceptual funding strategy, possible starter line options on a smaller scale, and then next steps. As I mentioned, the process began in actually early spring of 2012, and it has progressed until now with a number of major benchmarks along the way. And that involved not only community meetings, but discussions. We had a major routing workshop with our policy and technical committees in summer of 2012, and then refined route and technology. Made a stop here at Public Works Committee last year about this time, and then continued refining until now. The two major project goals for this are enhance economic competitiveness and increase mobility options. Under economic competitiveness, obviously we want to, because this is focused on the center city, and you'll recall from the Legacy 2030 plan, we did a tax base analysis, and it showed in that higher density center city area, the more that we can nurture higher density development, mixed use development, that has a dividend that it pays through the tax base, and with net tax revenue that helps all of us, regardless of where you are in the city, helps all of us there. So certainly focusing development and investments, encouraging a mixture of uses, including equitable and affordable housing, and protecting the city's distinct character. And I was at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon this afternoon, just like many of you were, and the speaker there, Dr. Lawrence Chimerin, mentioned the first words out of his mouth was competitiveness. And he was speaking from a business and economic perspective, but competitiveness is also very, very real these days for cities and regions, not only the Southeast region, the national or international, but that's the kind of the sandbox that we're playing in. And more, that competitiveness is based on quality of life as an attractiveness factor for companies and organizations seeking a community that they can grow and thrive in. And more, that aspect of the economy is through innovation organizations and the employees that they want. So they are looking at vibrant urban environments, and so the more that we can do to kind of help create and nurture that environment helps us with that competitiveness. Increasing mobility options is the other main goal. connecting our key destinations within the urban core, connecting to both our local and our regional transit to provide that next mile of service wherever folks are going. That's certainly the reason why PART is interested in this, and certainly a lot of talk about how this interacts with WISTA, supporting existing communities and extending pedestrian connectivity. Those are the objectives under those two goals there. This was the study area, basically ranging from Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center on the west through the West End and Ballpark area into the core of downtown, into the Innovation Corridor, to Winston-Salem State University area, and into East Winston, the core of East Winston's commercial area. So that was the study area that was looked at with all the different activities that need to be connected in there. Any alternatives analysis that is going to the feds for them to look at for possible participation, a very important thing is a purpose and need statement that is in there. And the purpose and need statement that is in this study is urban circulators needed to help us grow smarter and better by managing future development, and that comes directly out of our legacy plan, your adopted policy there, with the goal of enhancing economic competitiveness and providing more mobility options for these different activity centers. And as you look through them, it's a pretty impressive list of things that can be connected. The 11,000 Baptist Medical Center employees, BB&T Ballpark with 300,000 just for Dash game days and 50,000 non-game day visitors annually. 6.1 million gross square feet of planned redevelopment space, and another 20,000 new employees at Wake Forest Innovation Corridor. Certainly downtown and everything that it is right now, which includes 20,000 employees and over 2,000 residents within the downtown area. 6,500 students attending Winston-Salem State University directly within the study area here. The Transportation Center serves nearly 11,000 passengers per day. And then certainly the commercial center, the East Winston community, and all the goals and aspirations for that for the future. So there's many things that could be connected into a system that could help enhance our economic growth. The technology options that were considered were certainly started with a no-build option, just making use of our existing bus system to let people connect within that area. Next one is the use of a specialized vehicle that's a bus vehicle, but an enhanced bus service for this area that emphasizes connecting people within there. And then certainly the build strategy for a modern rail streetcar that runs in mixed traffic within the area as well. So those are the technology options that were looked at. The route options, you see this, I guess, what we call spaghetti map. And there are lots of permutations and combinations that were looked at throughout this area to see what would best connect people and activities. And also, just as importantly in that, maybe even, well, just as importantly, is enhancing areas that could develop or redevelop. So looking at what route maximize those possibilities. Public outreach, I mentioned that just briefly at first, but we had 3 open houses during the whole course of the study, 1 planning workshop, 1 town hall meeting. Councilmember Montgomery accommodated that. Meetings with stakeholders, a number of different stakeholder groups throughout the area that we met with individually, our policy advisory and our technical advisory committees. And then we also did an online survey, had 200 respondents responding to things like what kind of destinations would they like to go to on such a system, whether they'd be more likely to ride a streetcar versus an enhanced bus, whether they currently use WISTA or PART right now, and whether they've ever used the rubber tire trolley bus that goes around. The locally preferred alternative in terms of technology in this report is streetcar. It's being recommended as the locally preferred alternative because of its unique ability to attract more economic development opportunities in Winston-Salem. You see the chart to the right, and that shows different technologies in terms of their ability to leverage higher amounts of development. and you see streetcar, based on the experience in other cities, by far leverages a much higher amount of economic development and growth there. The study concludes that the proposed streetcar could attract more intense commercial and denser residential development. It would not generate economic growth on its own, but it would accelerate and concentrate growth within those areas that could, again, help benefit our tax base. After doing the calculations of all the possibilities there, the consultants concluded that in addition to the natural growth that would occur in this area without streetcar, this could attract an additional $2.8 billion worth of economic impact and 12,500 additional new jobs along the preferred route over a 20-year period of time. So, and again, the consultants believe that streetcar supports the project's two primary goals, enhancing economic competitiveness and providing more mobility options better than the other two options. This is the proposed locally preferred alternative in terms of route, and you can see how it connects the medical center area to the west all the way over to the East Winston commercial area. It goes by the Burke Street and Ballpark area into the core of downtown, past the transportation center, through the heart of the innovation quarter, over to Winston-Salem State University, by Union Station, and up to the East Winston commercial area. You see the star there where Union Station is. That is the recommended place for a maintenance facility. So that could be incorporated into the plans for Union Station there. The total additional build-out capacity that's estimated along the proposed route, this is a little more detailed information on that economic impact, and this would be within 600 to 700 feet of the route of the streetcar, would be somewhere between 5,000 and 11,000 residential units and an additional 11 to 12 million square feet of commercial development. 12,500 new jobs would be the estimate there. And of that 11 to 12 million square feet of commercial development, about 6.2 million would be within the innovation quarter plan area, and the remainder would be split between the area west of the innovation quarter going through downtown, the ballpark area, and the medical center area, and then the other part eastward to the Winston-Salem State area and East Winston. This gives you a little bit of an idea of how they analyzed the development proposal. So each of those shaded in areas was a district that they looked specifically at the possibilities for those areas in terms of vacant land, redevelopable land, zoning, historic resources, things like that, things that were either enhancements or kind of constraints on development potential. And they did their analysis by sector in order to come up with those numbers that you saw. Let me go first to the estimated cost of that entire route with everything that would be needed to go with it is $155,200,000. That's in current dollars. Projected out to 2017 dollars, $179.8 million. You can see the breakout there between what of that is guideway and track, what is stations, support facilities, site work, right-of-way, vehicles, all of the engineering and design and construction management and all those things that fit into that total. Looking at that amount and how could it possibly be funded, they also looked at a number of different funding scenarios. And again, one reason why we're doing this as an alternatives analysis is that it fits the federal criteria for funding. So there's three scenarios here as examples here. One is minimal federal participation, which puts the maximum burden on local sources, which could be a variety of different kinds that are detailed in your report. A small state match, future grants from the federal government, Scenario 2 is moderate federal participation, where certainly the local and the state share would go down. The federal share would go up roughly the same as the state and local together. And then Scenario 3 is the maximum federal participation that would look at 2 or 3 different sources of federal funding, plus a much smaller amount of state and local funding. All of those are viable scenarios that would need to be looked at later on, and whenever there is a decision to go forward with this, then there would have to be a specific funding development strategy and plan put together to do that. But this was just looking at the scenarios here. The potential starter line segments, the consultants also looked at that if the council wants to pursue this, but is wanting to start with any kind of smaller segments in the entire line, these are some different options to look at that have less mileage, but it would be on the same alignment and would have varying levels of total cost there. But that was just to illustrate that there are some options among that, within that total route that is proposed as the locally preferred alternative. So, last slide is next steps. Certainly, it's you have the resolution in your packet there that would propose that the council designate both the technology that's recommended in here and the route as the locally preferred alternative. If the committee feels comfortable in doing that, it would go to the council. The council would take action. We would then share the alternatives analysis and the council's resolution with the Federal Transit Administration, and so that they can see where we have come from, and then they will be aware that as you want to take other steps, this is a project that has met their criteria to date for doing that. Doesn't make any funding commitments from any source, local or federal, but it simply says that you're on the path for this for whenever you choose to do that. Other steps, if the council wishes to later on think about how it would want to implement that and whether it wants to go forward with an environmental review that's also necessary, do preliminary engineering, all those are later steps. So that resolution in your packet says that in addition to designating it, you would ask the city manager to put together a list of next steps for you to consider. So that's the presentation the consultants put together. I'd be glad to answer any general questions, but if you had any detailed ones, I'd be very eager to get the consultants here to help answer them. So.
Okay, so what we've got here is we have the feasibility, not the feasibility, I'm sorry, the locally preferred alternatives analysis and a recommendation from the task force that we put together on this with the assistance and technical advice of the consultant for a locally preferred alternative that in the bottom line does 2 things. It specifies a technology that it recommends for a circulator, an urban circulator, that is the streetcar fixed rail system, and it identifies the locally preferred alternative route. And that LPA route is phase 1 of a conceptual system. So what we have before us at this point for questions and discussion is a recommended resolution to council that would simply put our stamp of approval on those recommendations, the preferred technology and that preferred route 1, and authorize and direct staff to do further work identifying how we might hunt for dollars, how we might approach this. So with that kind of as the framework of what's before us for discussion today. Mr. Montgomery.
I have a question and a comment. On the next step portion, let's say we agreed to a resolution and we approve one of the options that exists here in what we have. The number 3, the step there, designate a start line. That would be a portion of what we're looking at, but or the whole thing? Help me understand what that is.
Well, the council, 1 and 2 is the most important thing right now. Further down the road, if the council decides, you know, we don't want to do 4 miles of streetcar right all at one time, we'd rather start off with a smaller step, that would be your option to decide to do that. Or you could say, no, we want to do the whole thing, so we want to put together a strategy for the whole thing. So that, you don't have to decide to do a smaller starter line unless you just want to.
Yeah, at this point, what we've got before us is the recommendation for technology and locally preferred alternative route. And the recommendation before us is the whole thing, all the way from Wake Forest Baptist to the East Winston Commercial Center through the routes in the meantime.
And the feds are not looking to you to do number 3.
Yeah, number 3 is what is a projection down the road of an alternative that staff might bring back to us for discussion if, say, you know, the hunt for potential dollar sources goes out and they say, well, you know, we can't find $179 million right now, but we could find $80 million. If we could find $80 million, is there a sub-part of the route that you'd like to start with? For example, just, you know, this is completely off topic, Mr. Montgomery.
Well, that was but the point of the question was just that if we approve something, we direct staff to go in to search for the resources that are there, it would be based upon a full option and not
Yes.
a starter per se option.
Right.
The initial look would be for the large, whatever it would take to actually do that.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's, I just wanted to make sure that was the case in terms of what we were looking at. And then comment, if I may, will be just simply in terms of looking what we have here. I think it's a good analysis of the different routes and takes us clearly through the thinking and the process that took place to get us to where we are. I know that there'll be some in even community-wise that will want to know, even after this, if we approve something like this, what's the next place? Because I know there's going to be a conversation of more of a cross-section in terms of if we did this, what will be the next phase of being inclusion. But I think we have to start somewhere, and that's what this is in terms of looking at starting at some place. And if we approve this for just in terms of the general public, it doesn't mean that this is going to be something that would happen next week. It's in anticipation and based upon getting actual dollars in place to make it happen. And that's the biggest thing, finding the dollars to actually make it happen, but you can't find the dollars for something that you hadn't planned for.
And as to sort of elaborate on Councilmember Montgomery's point there, as we discussed at our priorities meeting last month, you know, what we're looking at here is the possibility of getting in place a concept that we could use to take advantage of opportunities as they're identified in the future. You know, we missed out on the opportunities in the time frame of 3 to 7 years ago when there was actually more federal money available and state money was available because we didn't have one of these in place to work from. So this is, do we want to put a tool in place that we can use then to work on this economic development and transportation option for the future? And one other thing, Mr. Norby, perhaps you could give us an idea of some of the parties that were involved and represented on the committee that was advising and made this recommendation to us. You know, what community partners were involved in it?
We had representatives from Winston-Salem State University, Wake Forest Innovation Corridor, the Medical Center, the Downtown Partnership, I'm drawing a blank. It was, if you could think of major institutions and employers along the way, we had, yes, okay. Downtown Partnership, the Chamber of Commerce, the State Transportation Board, PART, R.J. Reynolds, Goler CDC, WISTA, and And so it was quite a variety of stakeholders that were on those advisory committees. Plus, we went out and actually had meetings with individual groups of people to talk specifically about their concerns, ideas, hopes, things like that.
And as I recall, there were major changes to the alternatives that came forward as a result of that community feedback. And at the end, the stakeholder group, the committee, if I'm remembering correctly, was unanimous in its recommendation.
That's right.
For this technology and this locally preferred alternative. Mr. Clark.
Just a quick question. Do you anticipate holding this in committee for a while? Because I have a lot of questions, but I'd rather just get with Paul on them versus, because
it's at the committee's pleasure.
I mean, I can ask him now, just some of them. I mean, we had a lot of reading this week, and I did try to concentrate as much as I could, but I feel sure he doesn't have the answers to most of the questions I have, and I think when I read, every time I read through it, I come up with some more questions. So do you want me to ask them now, or are we going to hold it a while so I can meet with him?
How do other committee members feel? I am personally easy either way, depending on what the majority wants. I'm prepared to recommend this, but if other committee members want to hold this in committee, we can do so, I think, for another month without harm. Mr. Taylor?
I defer to the chair. I do have one question at the appropriate time.
Mr. Montgomery?
I'm not inclined either way.
Why don't you tell us, Mr. Clark, then what kinds of questions?
All right, I'll just go through it. First off, this is a huge amount of money. Huge amount of money. And 99% of the citizens are not going to ride this. Their optimistic thing is 1%, 2,200 people. So I want to be sure I understand what you're asking the 99% to pay for. And I'm just going to thumb through here real quick. You mentioned in here, bear with me.
While you're looking that up, we were asking them to consider paying for part of $179 million as an effort to leverage $2.8 billion in additional tax-based development.
Page 16 or page 75, whatever number you want to use there. It said you talked about other cities. I'd like to know what other cities they used as their analysis on. Just a question.
They looked, I know some cities I can name right off the top of my head.
Well, I just like them all. Just you don't need to answer tonight.
Okay.
Just,
all right.
What cities did they use, I guess, HRP or whatever their name is?
I can give you examples: Memphis, Tampa.
Well, just get me the names of them, please. That's, unless you can provide me with all the names tonight, whatever.
Okay.
Another one, it says it's going to have 5,000 to 11,000 residential units. These are roughly 1,200 square feet of these apartments or homes. And if they're apartments, how many apartments are there in the city versus how many more they're expecting here? I'm looking at market share there. What percent of people are you expecting to move downtown? Another one is it has in here, there's $41 million is the cost of the moving stock, the 7 vehicles plus one spare. What's the useful life of a streetcar? Because at some point we got to replace that, and that's $41 million. And for example, if they last 10 years, I have no idea, I don't own one. If they last 10 years, that says you got to set aside $4 million every year, because in 10 years you got to buy new ones. You got to take that into consideration. Fares. What's an appropriate level of fares? That's where I'd like to see what the other cities charge. We were using 59 cents, which is the average fare. I'm not sure where that number comes from, but just would like some information such as that. I would like to check with Leslie Mazinga, who is our person in Washington, just to get a feel for, are there any federal programs that would apply to this? And the same question in Raleigh. Are there any appropriate plans, et cetera, et cetera? So it's just questions like that, and that's just a quick overview. But I don't want to take everybody's time tonight, but and if I'm not mistaken, Paul, this is the third study. We did an original study, then we did a feasibility study, and this is a best routes type of.
Yeah, this by far is the most extensive study that's been done, the alternatives analysis fitting specific federal criteria for that. The others were just preliminary studies.
And I think I've got copies of those. If not, I may ask for, but I think I've got them. I just got to go dig them up. I got a copy of everything at the house. I just got to find it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
I think my questions were just touched on. Number one, Mr. Norby, I've heard we've missed our window to receive a large amount of federal funding. Are there funds available federally to support this urban circulator?
Yes, I mean, in the new transportation bill, there is actually increased funding for public transit, and so I would expect there will be a continuation of things like Tiger grants, and one particular thing that they mentioned in this study and talked about was the Small Starts program, which is funded. So I think the answer, I mean, our consultants are very expert and are very involved in the federal funding process, so they put in here some actually feasible sources. So I think if we check with Ms. Monzingo, she'll probably confirm a lot of what's already there.
Yes. I was probably too pessimistic when I said that the window for federal dollars was 3 to 7 years ago. Actually, federal dollars continue to be available. It's the state dollars that the current administration and legislature in Raleigh has X'd out. And we could have that as an ongoing situation, or that could change in any 2 or 4 year cycle.
And that leads me to my next question. There are several different combinations of monies. We know that the number is 179 million, whether it comes from state, local, federal, or a combination of the three. It's a senior moment. I just went blank. Talk to me about the economic impact. It's going to cost us 179 million, whatever combination we get the money. The economic impact it could potentially give us locally. I know I heard Councilmember Bessie mention that briefly.
Right.
I know you talked about it in your presentation.
And in their study, and by the way, they have more detailed technical reports on most of these individual subjects that I touched on real lightly in the presentation. They are actually online at winstonssalemcirculator.com, but all those technical reports are there in case you want to dive into that. But they did an extensive amount of analysis, and they felt it was a fairly conservative analysis based on the other experience of other cities, including cities similar to Winston-Salem, like Little Rock, Arkansas. So they weren't just big cities or cities out west. They were cities that were, but they looked at growth trends. They looked at the experience of cities that have this technology that have attracted more shares of their growth into this area, and they came up with that estimate over 25 years of $2.8 billion in additional economic impact, the housing unit breakdown, the additional jobs that would come with that.
Ms. Adams and Ms. McIntosh.
He was first.
Okay, Ms. McIntosh.
To some degree, I look at this as, from a competitive standpoint, as somewhat of an arms race. We're competing with other like-sized cities like Greenville, South Carolina, and other places. Do we know how far along other cities our size are? Are we in the lead on this, or are we looking at being at a competitive disadvantage 5 years down the road?
For our size of city, there are a number of cities around the country that have been looking at this. I don't believe Greenville is one of those that's been looking at it, but cities like Madison, Wisconsin, getting a little bigger, Milwaukee, certainly Cincinnati is under construction. They had a bit of controversy, but that's gotten worked out now, and they are under construction with their system. Charlotte is moving fairly aggressively now to expand their initial starter line that they got Tiger funding from. And Fort Lauderdale, Florida is doing one right now. Tucson, Arizona is under construction, Salt Lake City. Boise, Idaho has been seriously looking at it. I don't think they've made a commitment yet.
The other thing is the numbers that you had up for the number of residential units, the number of square feet of commercial space. I'd love to see that translated into what they would generate in terms of tax dollars. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that we're looking at the ridership covering the cost of this, but what we're looking at is the increase in taxes that we take in from increased development covering that cost.
We could do a calculation on that and what that translates to.
And in terms of the anticipated new center city population for residential units. We're not looking at primarily people moving from other parts of the city, although there's always the opportunity for some of that. We're looking at an anticipated 120,000 additional residents of Forsyth County over the next, what does that projection period, 10 years?
20.
20 years. The very real question of where are they going to go? And is it going to sprawl out around the city edges, or are we going to have more opportunity for dense urban living environments?
Well, and just in keeping in mind what Legacy is saying, the city limits of Winston-Salem are fairly constrained right now. So we don't have a lot of ability to go further out, so we've got to grow from within. And what tools are available to help us grow the most from within there? And certainly starting with the downtown area, but also looking at other areas of the city as well.
Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Initially, 4 or 5 years ago, I was not a big fan of this project. But over the years and, being able to see where the economy has taken us and probably going to take us some more, the name of the new game is you got to come up with new ways to make your city also a destination place. That's beyond the restaurants and the Arts Council and Old Salem and the history. That's beyond that, because you can get that anywhere. You've now got to start doing some other things that serve 2 to 3 purposes. I see this as an economic development tool. I see this as just like we dreamed 30 years ago about how our downtown had tumbleweeds in it. I see this as a dream just like the research park and the innovation quarter. That's how I see this initiative. I think if we wait too long on this, we need to be ready, we need to be progressive, and we need to go after, start looking for the funds, because eventually the infrastructure of this country is going to open up, and we need to be ready to go. But I believe we could probably start somewhere. I believe that this also will bring in tourism dollars as well as community dollars. I just think we need to do this. I think this is part of our legacy. I think this is one of those we're going to have to take a chance on. It's a good chance, but I think we can make this work.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I heard some good questions from Mr. Clark, but I didn't hear any questions that I don't think the data is already assembled and ready to provide. So I think it would be within the committee's purview if it chose to send this forward with a recommendation to the council for the next meeting or to hold it. Mr. Montgomery.
In light of some of the questions and process that Councilman Clark mentioned, if we did decide to send this forward and not hold it in committee, just thinking about all the other things we have coming forward, could we vote on it but not send it to the next meeting, but send it out to a meeting thereafter, just for enough time for any additional?
Yes, we could.
Okay. If we move forward, that would be my recommendation, just in light to make sure that Councilman Clark and any other councilman has the opportunity to get any additional questions answered, even though I feel comfortable moving forward at this time.
A motion could be made, for example, that would send this to the second full council meeting in March.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Can you tell me exactly what the motion is?
The motion would be to recommend adoption of the proposed resolution, but to ask that be placed on the agenda of the second council meeting in March, so as to ensure that all of the information you've asked for can be assembled and provided to council members in advance of the discussion.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Motion passes 3-1, and we will ask that this be placed on the council agenda for the second meeting in March. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Norby, for pinch hitting. Thank you, Mr. Shelley. We have now item G3. 3, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for waiting patiently for this.
Report on Wake Forest University Area Bicycle and Pedestrian Study.
And reporting, we have I believe, our pedestrian, our bike ped coordinator, Mr. Matthew Burzik.
Sir.
Mr. Burzik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, council members. Before I get started, does everybody have the handout, 11 by 17 color? This is probably the best thing to refer to during the presentation. We're going to be focusing on, I'll do a brief presentation on the results of the study we did with Wake Forest University. It was a bike, pedestrian, and transit study to try to identify ways to encourage more trips to the campus from students, faculty, staff, and residents in that area, ways to make that more bicycle pedestrian friendly. So refer to that. There's also a website that has the actual study on it. That is walkbikeridewfu.com. So if you want to see the whole study, you can go to that point, to that website. Like I said, we're going to focus on the results of the study, what the recommendations were from the consultant that we worked with. Amy Crum in the planning department was actually the project manager for this, so if you have questions about the process we went through, Amy will be the best to answer those. But I'll try to answer or to explain what the recommendations are and how we go ahead with trying to implement some of those. So it began with the partnership with Wake Forest. We actually reached out to all the colleges and universities in town a few years ago because we felt that was probably a way we can reach some low-hanging fruit and encourage more students to ride and walk. We typically have really good success rates with getting students to walk. Wake Forest, they had an interest in that kind of idea as well, so they decided to contact us and take us up on that offer to work on that kind of thing. So what we wanted to do was figure out what we can do in terms of infrastructure, policy, and program recommendations to encourage more walking, biking, and transit use. And I'll skip through. This is intended to be about a half-an-hour presentation. I definitely don't want to keep you that long. So,
you're making it to yourself.
The focus for the study was a 2-mile area around the campus. So that includes a lot of the students who live around there, some faculty, some staff, and a lot of other residents who can use the campus as a resource in their community. The other thing we want this study to serve as is a model for other colleges and universities in town. So, the process we went through with this, the results that we got from it, how can we replicate this at other colleges, across town? And like I said, the colleges are a great place to start as we're trying to develop the biking and pedestrian infrastructure more. The layout of college campuses, the students there, that's a really good opportunity to increase biking and walking. So we worked with the MPO, we applied some planning funds, federal planning funds. Wake Forest agreed to cover the 20% match for that. And we hired Alta Planning and Design to help us with the study. Now, Alta is probably the national leader in biking and pedestrian planning. And we have a lot of difficult issues around the Wake Forest campus, whether it's University Parkway, Polo Road, Ronaldo Road, South Creek Parkway, a lot of difficult issues to deal with, and we felt they were the best. Probably could help us with some really innovative ideas, and I think that's the result that we have. One more thing about that, the plan represents concepts that we can further study. This is in no way a final plan. We need to do some analysis of which projects we want to move forward with. We have a lot of projects in this study, so we won't be able to do all of them, so we need to study, evaluate, rank those, and work with all of you on that ranking. And then at that point, we would try to find some federal funds, find the local funds to match that, and then work on actually engineering some of these things. So what you see in front of you is really just a conceptual design. So a little bit about the process. Like most plans, they looked at the current conditions and then did a needs analysis. They did surveys, public outreach on campus and in the community, and then perform some bicycle and pedestrian counts around the perimeter of campus. Some of the issues that they identified through those processes, the big issues for students, faculty, and staff, the connectivity of the facilities in that area, so do the sidewalks connect? In a lot of cases, they don't. The safety, so is it safe to cross the street, or just be out on a bike or on your feet? Separation in facilities, so a lot of cyclists and pedestrians are looking for separation facilities that actually get them away from motor vehicles. So you'll see some of the recommendations are recommending that. And then the cultural change. So right now, a lot of students, a lot of faculty and staff are driving to campus, and that's been the case for a long time. So what kinds of programs and policies can we work on to try to change that? When it comes to the infrastructure recommendations, the way the consultants broke out the plan, broke it into 5 priority corridors or connections for the most part. And within each of those corridors, there's a list of improvements that'll work together to create a safer environment. And each of those corridors, they included a planning level cost estimate, so you can get an idea of how much it'll cost to implement some of these projects. They also looked at our request at long-term solutions as well as short-term solutions. So what can we do now to make the improvements? And then maybe what can we do long-term to really change the environment? They called that the now and the wow factor. The first corridor that they looked at was Polo Road. So Polo Road connects a lot of the parking, a lot of the student housing to the north, also connects neighborhoods to the east and the west. So the phase 1, there were actually 2 near-term phases with this project. Phase 1 was Indiana Avenue to Ronaldo Road, and that they called for a complete streets retrofit, so essentially reallocating some of the space of that road to include things like medians, bicycle lanes, and then using some of those medians to provide pedestrian refuges so people could actually get across the street. Cross one lane, stop, look, cross the other lane instead of trying to cross 3 lanes all at once. So I mentioned the bicycle lanes, pedestrian treatments at Ronaldo Road. So right now, that intersection at Ronaldo and Polo, really no pedestrian infrastructure there. So we look at adding high visibility crosswalks, countdown pedestrian signals, curb ramps, and then sidewalks leading to the intersection itself. And then another one of the recommendations, probably a big one for this one, was roundabouts at Long Drive and Polo Ridge Court. And that's the kind of project that we'll need to study further, whether that would actually work and what that would look like if it was to be implemented. Second phase of that project is continuing west from Polo Ridge Court all the way to Robin Hood Road, continuing a lot of those same kinds of improvements. The complete streets retrofit, so converting from 3 lanes to 2 lanes and adding the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. More roundabouts, this time at Ransom Road and Peace Haven Road, again, needing further study. And then the installation of mini roundabouts throughout the corridor. So mini roundabouts, as the name would suggest, just a miniature version of the roundabouts that we're used to, but are typically used where space is constrained and is usually as a traffic calming device. So, and that's one of the ideas, slow the traffic down on Polo Road, make it a little bit safer for people to cross and to bike along that corridor. The next corridor was the Ronaldo campus to the athletics campus, so essentially University Parkway. It's the link between, University is, crossing University is the link between that main campus and where all the athletics are and some of the parking as well. It's a tremendous barrier. It's a difficult crossing. There's about a 1.5 mile stretch past the Wake Forest area where there isn't a designated pedestrian crossing. So we have a lot of people crossing mid-block in dangerous situations. So this was another one of the high priority corridors. You can see the cost estimate there was about $1.3 million. Some of the near-term improvements, pedestrian crossing, so making sure there's a marked pedestrian crossing. The primary recommendation was at Howell Street, and what we would do there is a hawk signal. Essentially creates a signalized intersection, but it's exclusively for pedestrians. So instead of it being at that intersecting with a street, it intersects with a crosswalk, and that would be user actuated. And we'd have to coordinate with NCDOT on that, of course, since University Parkway is a state-maintained road. Another one of the recommendations was a bike and pedestrian bridge across University Parkway just north of Reynolds Boulevard. And we would take advantage of some of the existing terrain there. The pedestrian bridges typically work best where they work with the terrain, so people are hesitant to walk up a set of stairs, cross, and then climb down, where in this situation, the existing terrain would encourage people to use that bridge to cross. That bridge would connect to the campus via a multi-use path and then connect to the athletics area via greenway or sidewalk improvements. They would also recommend pedestrian improvements at the signal at Deacon Boulevard and then to improve the sidewalk on the west side of University Parkway down to Deacon Boulevard. So there's sidewalk there currently, but it's not the most inviting sidewalk. I think it's up against the curb, or maybe there's a small separation, but they were recommending further separation from the road, plantings, things like that, to make it a more comfortable environment to walk in. The third corridor to look at was the campus to western neighborhoods, essentially Silas Creek Parkway. And some of the near-term improvements for that were a greenway through Polo Park to the signal at Silas Creek Parkway, and then beyond that as well to the intersection of Wake Forest Road and Ronaldo Road. So you can see that's the green line on the map here. Tying in with that, making some intersection improvements at Wake Forest Road and Silas Creek Parkway. So that's the schematic you see there with that improved pedestrian crossing. Really not that big of a change. A lot of those islands, a lot of that space is already there. So it's just kind of retrofitting that intersection. Again, intersection improvements at Wake Forest Road and Ronaldo Road. And then a sidewalk connection from Silas Creek Parkway and Wake Forest Road to Hope Valley Road. So Hope Valley is one of the neighborhood connections there. So that then allows people who live within that residential area to get out, walk along Silas Creek Parkway, and get to the campus without, in a relatively safe way. And then another one of the recommendations, and I think this could be applied in other locations as well, was connecting dead-end streets in those residential areas with bicycle and pedestrian paths, essentially. It's not opening the roads up to motor vehicle traffic, but just opening those dead-end streets up so people could walk and bike instead of having to travel all the way around or travel on a street like Silas Creek Parkway. Fourth corridor was the campus to Bethabara Greenway, or Bethabara Road. Again, with Bethabara Road, we were looking at doing a complete streets retrofit, so taking Bethabara Road from 3 lanes down to 2 lanes, improving the pedestrian infrastructure there, adding bike lanes, and then lowering the speed limit down to 35 miles per hour. This kind of work where we'd be reducing lanes like that, we need to do further study, see what the turning movements are there, how that would affect traffic if we were to remove that lane. But if we were able to make that connection, there's a lot of student housing up to the north there. And we actually implemented the first phase of a side path along Long Drive from Polo Road up to University Parkway. So we would continue that side path to Bethabara Road. At that point, people could use the sidewalks or get in the bike lanes and then reach those student housing areas that are off Bethabara Road. Another part of this you can see in the schematic, the crossing improvements at Bethabara and University Parkway. Right now, you're kind of on your own through there, so this would just formalize that. Give pedestrians a refuge so they can cross 1 lane at a time. And like I said, extend that Long Drive side path.
Matthew, the Long Drive side path, that's not quite a new concept in Winston-Salem, but it's pretty new.
Relatively new, yes.
Was it used in preference to a sidewalk because it was less expensive, because it was more attractive to bikes? What was the thing?
Yeah, so that was originally a sidewalk project, and we changed it from sidewalk to side path because we had these same ideas in mind, that there were opportunities for students who lived maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, maybe a little bit too far to walk in, but definitely close enough to bike in. And that side path instead of it being a concrete path with a joint every 5 feet, it's a smooth asphalt path. So, and it's 10 feet wide instead of 5 feet wide. So essentially it's like dropping a greenway alongside of a road. So cyclists can use it, pedestrians can use it. It serves everybody a little bit better than a sidewalk would.
How does the cost compare per linear foot?
It was more expensive. I don't know how much offhand, though, but we can check on that. I can get that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing about side paths, they work well where there aren't a lot of intersections. So between Polo Road and University Parkway, there's only 2 driveways. What you have to watch out for is, if there were a lot of intersections, then you're creating a conflict point for cyclists at every one of those intersections. So they don't work in every situation, but in certain ones they will. And then the final corridor that we looked at was Ronaldo Road. So essentially the campus to downtown and some of the southern neighborhoods. The price tag on that was $330,000. And some of the improvements recommended included a side path, again, along Ronaldo Road from Coliseum Drive to Grayland Court. Pedestrian intersection improvements at Ronaldo and Coliseum. And then probably the big one, and if you've ridden on, or if you've driven on Ronaldo Road, you've certainly seen pedestrians and cyclists waiting at the Grayland driveway, trying to cross the street there. One of the recommendations is to make a pedestrian crossing improvement just north of that intersection. So you can see in the design drawing there the current situation and what they're proposing, where we would have that median place for people to cross one lane, stop, check for traffic, and cross the other lane. And then that would be tied in via side path and a sidewalk to get you back into the Ronaldo area. And I think that was one of the projects we heard the most about was that one. And then bicycle crossing improvements at Arbor Road. So Arbor is part of our signed bike route network, so trying to improve that. And going with some innovative ideas like bicycle boulevards, where you try to slow the traffic down on the street, discourage drivers, encourage more biking and walking, but still make it accessible for people who have to drive in, who live in that area. But I think we might see some traction with that, because not only is it helping cyclists and pedestrians, it's also calming the traffic in neighborhoods, and I know there are a lot of neighborhoods that are trying to make that happen. Outside of the 5 priority corridors, they also looked at what can we do short, medium, and long term in different areas. So for pedestrian infrastructure, what can we do for adding sidewalk and crossing improvements? And then the long term were kind of the complete street retrofits, where you completely redesign the street. For bike infrastructure, short term, adding shared lane markings, bike lanes. It can be a little bit longer term, the bicycle boulevard idea I mentioned. And again, the complete streets retrofits. They also mentioned it was also a transit study, so there were transit recommendations, not only for the Wake Forest has its own set of shuttles, so there were recommendations on adding more service for that, getting some of the apartment complexes to help fund those, and then increasing the number of locations that those shuttles serve, and then coordination with WISTA to make sure that the on-campus and near-campus stop locations, make sure those are in the right places and make sure they have the right amenities, and with the route restructuring going on, now is the time to make sure that happens. As far as programs and policies, we can make all the infrastructure improvements, but if we don't give people a reason to use that, they probably won't. So one of the recommendations was to create a transportation demand management program on the Wake Forest campus. So managing the demand for parking on campus. There's a number of strategies that you can use for that, whether it's charging a fee for parking, providing free bus passes for students, faculty, and staff, providing facilities like showers, things that encourage more biking and walking. So they recommended some things that the campus can do for that. So those are all the projects. The next step for us, what Amy and I have started working on with the campus, is coming up with some criteria so that we can work on ranking these projects. I think if you added up all the near-term projects, it was about $10 million, so we're going to need to pare that down and rank the projects. So we're working on the criteria to use for that, and we will certainly bring that back to you when we have it and get your help on selecting which projects should be priorities. After that, once we have that list of prioritized projects, what we'll probably do is take some of those projects, submit them through the MPO's next call for projects, which should be at the end of 2014. So we can submit those, see how they rank against other MPO projects. Hopefully receive some funding through that. And then partnering with Wake Forest, maybe they can provide local match or help fund outright some of the projects as well, depending on what they feel are the most important projects. In terms of what we're doing right now, the state is going through its strategic prioritization process right now. We are submitting the University Parkway, at least the sidewalk portion of that, as one of our projects. We submitted it through Spot 2.0 as well, and it came out as the #1 sidewalk project in the state. So I'm hopeful that it will receive a similar ranking this time. It didn't receive funding last time because we had another top-ranked project in the state, so we had to make a choice. But I feel good about that one. That should come out very high again. And then an established STPDA project, we continue to do bicycle lane design and implementation, and Stratford Road is one of those projects that we're going after. So we'll continue to do what we can right now and then work towards funding in the future as well.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Clark.
A number of questions and comments. First off, I know Wake Forest has built a number of new dorms recently. And you don't need to answer these questions tomorrow, but I do think at some point it'd be worthwhile to look at what % of students live on campus now and what % Wake's looking in the future. I think at least it appears to be part of the answer is you put the students on campus, and therefore you don't have to provide as much parking or remote parking or whatever. Second, I do like your concept. I'm not sure what term Dan used. I'm calling them the wide sidewalks. What do you call them?
Side path.
Side paths. I have always been concerned about the false sense of safety when we paint a white line down a road, the side of a road, and put a little bike symbol. I don't think a bicycle has ever won a fight with a car. And I'm just concerned that we got people with bikes, and the only thing separating them from cars is a white line. And therefore, I do like this concept of the wide paths that could do something there. I would like at some appropriate time, you did mention that Wake does run shuttles, and I'm thinking particularly out in the Silas Creek, Bethania area, there are a number of large apartment complexes out there which I expect do funnel students in. That would be of interest. I will also mention I do attend the Wake Forest football games, and I do see the students walking back, and there are parts that they do not walk on sidewalks. I think it would be appropriate. And of course, we just had earlier in the day, can't remember, it's been so long ago now, but we had a presentation or comment on our sidewalk plan. But I do think it would be worthwhile to work with Wake to coordinate that. Some people enjoy the game more than others. Some people celebrate with various beverages and foods, and I just worry about a bunch of students walking back on grass pathways. And lastly, I'll mention I've been to 100 college campuses in my life, and I've never been to one that has enough parking, including Wake Forest. So I do know they do have an issue there.
Mr. McGovern.
Thank you.
No comments directly on that, but just a comment to Councilman Clark's comments on housing. Having worked in housing at university, the current trend across universities are putting in requirements, live-on requirements, particularly for freshmen and sophomore students. Normally, it's been a standard for freshmen to have live-on, but many universities are also moving to standards where they're now looking to require sophomores also to live on, and some are even going up even higher than that. And I know Wake is also looking at some of those same standards in terms of housing, in terms of more on-campus housing, where they're putting those live-on requirements for students to be there on campus. Part of the claim is that students who live on campus academically succeed higher, but then also there's the monetary gain too from having them also pay the board to live on campus. So I think that's part of it. On the same thing as you mentioned, part of this in terms of looking at some of the other colleges and universities in the area, particularly on the pedestrian safety portion, is something particularly, I know this looked particularly on Wake Forest area, that's consistently a concern in the Winston-Salem State area in terms of the pedestrian safety, where they're coming from campuses, just the makeup of how that campus is laid out, just daily, not just from football games and those things. It's an issue then too, but just on a daily basis, it's a consistent issue. So again, want that to, just for us to think about that.
Mr. McIntosh.
Councilman Adams and I both attended several of these, the workshops, and one of the things I was struck with was, I think we all think of biking as a young person's avocation, but this, we had a very good cross-section, all age groups. Actually, my age group was represented, I think, very, very well.
When I go out on Salem Creek Trail or Salem Lake Trail, I see more older adults on the bikes than I do kids.
As Councilman Adams was nodding her head when we were talking about the Wake Forest policy about kids on campus, Wake Forest has already instituted, so incoming freshmen this year are required to live on campus for 3 years. So the study was done during a period of time where that's already been instituted. But they still park their cars off campus and walk across because there's not enough space on campus. I've worked a couple of these pedestrian audits with Matthew, and one of the things I really like about them is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in these plans. Things that you can correct with just paint, things that are very inexpensive to do. So I like the phased approach of bringing these in. And then finally, Wake is doing this big program, Wake Will, where they're going to raise $1 billion. Will Wake pay for some of this? I mean, obviously, it's in their best interest, and they've been a very willing participant so far. So I'd love to continue that conversation with them.
Ms. Adams, did you have a comment?
No, I'm good.
All right. And again, this is both a detailed study of the needs in the Wake Forest area and an excellent example of a more in-depth study of an area. We could replicate this in other parts of the city, I think, very useful. So thank you for giving us the briefing, and sorry about the later evening hour. I appreciate everyone's patience and attention. Is there anything else tonight, Mr. Turner?
No.
With that emphatic comment, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.